everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. I'm Jessica. I am the Planetarium director. And with me, I have two of my students who are some familiar faces that you've seen in past shows. Well, at least one's face you've seen, the other's voice you've heard, but we're getting to see his face today. So I'll let them introduce themselves real quick.
All right, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student.
I am Eli. I am a physics undergraduate student.
And so Eli is usually our voice in the sky, but we get to see his face this time. And he will be monitoring the comments on the video. So if you have any questions throughout, just leave them there, and Eli will let us know when we have one come up. As a reminder, there is a bit of a lag between when we answer and when you're going to hear it, so give us a couple minutes. And if we don't get to it right away, we are going to take some time at the end of the show to answer any questions that we didn't get to. So today is another edition of our Constellation story time. Since we have a new month, new season, and some new constellations that are visible. And so I'm going to get the program started up. So give me just a second. I'm going to turn my video off so that we can get this going. And so for our story time today, we're going to be using a program called Stellarium. This is a kind of planetarium software that is actually free to download, and I have a link to it in the description of the video. So if you're interested in downloading this yourself and playing around with it, you can. So here we are. We are currently same time as right now, so up during the day. Obviously, the weather on here is beautiful, and that's not exactly what we're seeing today. That's one of the benefits of the planetarium. We can act as if every day is a clear, beautiful day. But since it is the daytime, what we want to do is speed time up a bit so that we can go into the night. And as I do so, you're going to see the sun moving across the sky as it starts to set down in the west. And so the sun always rises up in the east and sets in the west because of the Earth's rotation. And so as the sun is setting, we can see over in the west, trailing behind the sun, is the planet Venus. So if you go out right at sunset and look to the west, the very first bright point of light that you should see in the sky is going to be the planet Venus, and it's super bright. It's going to be brighter than any of the stars. It'll be the first thing that pops out right after sunset. And so that's right then. Now if we go a little bit later into the night, just so our stars can start popping out. And so we are now going to head over to the north, and I'm going to let Eli take it over and tell us about what we're seeing here in the north.
So kind of the at least personally and at the planetarium, I think the favorite place to start is with the Big Dipper, and that's just because it's big, it's easily recognizable, and it's bright enough that you can see it even when you've got lights outside, like street lights or houses. And the Big Dipper, we all know, has the handle and then the kind of dipper, or the pot, I suppose you'd call it. And this, while the Big Dipper isn't actually a constellation itself, it is kind of one of our more useful tools to find other things in the sky. Just then, I said that the Big Dipper is not a constellation itself, and that's because the Big Dipper is something called an asterism. And that's kind of a big word. That just means that, it's not a whole constellation itself. It's kind of a smaller, more recognizable part of a constellation. And that constellation is Ursa Major, the Big Bear. So Ursa Major is actually way bigger than the Big Dipper, but it's kind of easy to see once you know where the stars are. So I like to start with the tail of the Big Dipper, or Ursa Major, or the handle of the Big Dipper rather, and that's going to be the tail of Ursa Major. So then once you go down the handle of the Dipper or the tail of the bear, if you travel across the top of the pot and then forward more, you can kind of, and Jessica will outline it for you. You'll see the along the back and then the head of the bear. And then once you make it to the head, you can travel down its chest and you'll end up curving around its front leg just below that. And then you can go around the front leg up, and then you kind of on the stomach of the bear, and then it curves back down into the back leg, which then curves up and meets again with the tail. Kind of jumps out at you once you see it. At least it jumps out at me every time I find it when I'm looking in the sky. And the Big Dipper or Ursa Major is always kind of funny to me because personally, I don't think it looks incredibly like a bear. I think we have a pretty big tail to bear ratio right there. Personally, I think it looks a little bit more like a horse, but I'm not going to argue with the Greeks. They had their constellations down. So we have the Big Dipper, and then we have another constellation. If we have a Big Dipper or Big Bear, we need a Little Dipper and a Little Bear, and that is where we are going to go next. If you take the two farthest stars at the end of the Big Dipper, kind of the end of the pan, you connect them, and then you draw a line going off the stars upwards from the pan. You'll eventually reach the North Star. This star.
Eli, real quick, because we are getting into spring and summer, Big Bear is upside down, so you're actually
Right,
going to
right,
go down to get
right.
to the North Star.
Right, yeah, that was kind of hard. Like upward off the pan, as if it were
Yeah.
oriented regularly. Going, yeah. Thank you. I wasn't quite sure how that would be explained because the video is lagging. But so anyway, you travel off those stars, and then you draw a line, and you'll end up at the North Star, Polaris. And I think it's really interesting to talk about what it means to be a North Star. Being a North Star means that you are aligned with the Earth's axis of rotation. So Earth spins around much like a top on a table, and that axis is like the handle of the top, the little stem that you spin it from. And Polaris, or the North Star, is aligned with that. So from our viewpoint, it doesn't move, which makes it a really valuable navigational tool, and that's why it's so special. Over long periods of time, it moves. Over a period of about 24,000 years, it kind of makes a circle in the sky, so it will change over time, but for our purposes, it doesn't. So we have the North Star, Polaris, and this is the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. Now, the Little Dipper is much, much, much more difficult to see than the Big Dipper, simply because the stars aren't as bright to us. So you have to, in Duluth at least, it's too bright in the sky to see all of the stars. You need to go somewhere really dark to see them. But we'll outline it here for you. So we have a handle going down and it kind of curves inwards as opposed to the Big Dipper's outward curving handle. And then at the end, you have the pan, or the pot rather. And this is the Little Dipper, or Ursa Minor, the little bear. And there's no extension of it. This is the bear. And the handle is the tail of the bear. And then the pot is the body of the bear. Now, again, I don't want to argue with the Greeks, but personally, that one looks like a squirrel to me, something like that. But we'll call it two bears. I'll go along with the Greeks. And there's a story that accompanies these two bears because it's kind of weird that we have two bears in the sky. So once upon a time, Zeus didn't love to, do all of his chores on Mount Olympus or do whatever he had to do. So sometimes he would walk down the mountain and he would interact with some people, just kind of in the overworld. And one time, as he's walking through the forest, he encounters someone named Calypso. And Calypso, unbeknownst to Zeus, was a witch. She had magical powers. And she was going to try to turn him into a bear because she knew who he was and she wanted to disguise herself as him. So she tried to cast a spell on Zeus, but Zeus kind of turned it around at her and he turned Calypso into a bear. What he didn't know is that Calypso had a son who was a hunter from a village far away. And this son came hunting at that point, and he was coming through the brush, the bushes, and he had a bow and arrow drawn and pointed at the bear. Zeus recognized what was about to happen, and even though Calypso did turn or try to turn him into a bear, he didn't want that misfortune to happen. So his grand plan was to turn the sun into a bear as well. But he didn't want any danger to come to the son and the mother, so he grabbed them both by their tails and he spun them around really fast and he threw them into the nighttime sky. And him spinning them by their tails is why their tails are so long and disproportionate. So that is the story behind the Big and Little Dipper, the Big and Little Bear. Now, there aren't any other stories I'm going to tell in this area of the sky today, but there are a couple constellations that I want to talk about. The first of them is Draco. So that star hop that we took from the edge of the Big Dipper to the North Star is actually a good way to start finding Draco. So you take those two stars, you draw the line connecting them, and then you only go about a quarter of the distance from the Big Dipper to the North Star, and you'll be right next to the end of the tail of Draco the Dragon. Now, it's kind of hard to see. These stars aren't the brightest either, but there is a kind of a snake-like figure that slithers in between the bears and then kind of outwards next to the Little Dipper, and then the dragon's head is kind of this triangle that appears to be breathing fire on the star Vega, which is one corner of a triangle that I believe Jessica, you and Lindsay are going to talk about.
Yep.
So yeah, that is Draco the Dragon. That's another one of my favorite constellations. And then another set of constellations that I want to show you guys is also we're going to utilize that star hop that we talked about earlier, except rather than stopping at the North Star, we're going to go past the North Star, and you'll end up at Andromeda and Cepheus. So
Cassiopeia.
Cassiopeia, not Andromeda. So Cepheus and Cassiopeia are the king and queen. And they're pretty, I think these ones are really cool shapes. I think they actually are kind of like, they artistically look like what they're supposed to be. So Cepheus is a king sitting in his throne. So there's this kind of point at the top that is his head, or where his crown is, and then there's a box below him. It kind of looks like a drawing of a house. The two stars below the point, the crown, are his hands or his arms on his armrests, and then the two stars below are his feet at the bottom of his throne right there. And then as for Cassiopeia, she's also sitting in her throne, but we have kind of a side view. Her head is I don't know how to describe it, the top star. Jessica will show you. And then her body goes down. Then her legs kind of cut across. It's in this large W shape. Her upper legs cut across, and then her lower legs go down, and then her big feet are at the bottom. She wears clown shoes. So with that, I went over how much time I wanted to use. I will pass it on to Lindsay and Jessica.
All right. So I'm going to head us over to the west to look at a few constellations that are over here. So now that we are in springtime, or I guess this is southwest, we've got some good spring constellations that are up. And the most famous of those is probably Leo the Lion. Now, a lot of people will tell you if you want to find Leo, that you need to look for the big backwards question mark in the sky. The problem is, if it's a dark area and you have lots of stars, you may find more than one backwards question mark. And so the trick becomes to find the correct one. And you can do that actually by using the help of the Big Dipper. And so if we go back to finding our Big Dipper, which is going to be pretty high up in the sky this time of year, if you take the cup of the Big Dipper and use that to form an arrow, that arrow is going to point you, so you can see here, arrow is going to point you to the correct backwards question mark. And so this, I'm going to turn the lines back off, is the backwards question mark of Leo the lion. And so the bright star here is Regulus, which is the heart of the lion. The kind of backwards C portion, or no, it's not backwards. The C portion of the backwards question mark is his kind of head and mane, and then his body stretches off over to the left. And we're going to hear a story about Leo in just a little bit. But right next to Leo sits another constellation that is honestly pretty difficult to find because it is kind of dimmer stars in the constellation. But right next to the backwards question mark of Leo, you may see this group of stars that kind of looks like a Y or a flux capacitor. And this kind of Y shape is Cancer the crab. And so we have Leo the lion and Cancer the crab right next to each other. And they're both going to be in the same story in just a little bit. So with that, we are going to continue turning, facing now more southeast. And we're going to use the Big Dipper again to do another sort of star hopping. And so again, our Big Dipper is up here pretty high up in the sky. And this time we're going to use the handle of the Big Dipper to point to a bright star in the sky. And so what we want to do is use the curve of the handle, or the arc of the handle, and follow that curve to this bright star known as Arcturus. And so what we do is we use the handle of the Big Dipper to arc to Arcturus. And I know that Lindsay has a really great story about the star Arcturus, and so I'm going to let her tell that one real quick.
This story is from the Lumi Native American tribe, and it's about the coyote's eyeball. And coyote in a lot of Native American stories is kind of a troublemaker. And he is out walking around one day and happens to spot some very pretty ladies, and he wants to impress them. And so to impress them, he decides to take out his eyeballs and start to juggle them. So he's trying to juggle his eyeballs and throwing them higher and higher to be more and more impressive. And he ends up throwing one of his eyeballs so high that it lands right in the night sky and sticks there. And then he has only one eyeball left.
So that is our Arcturus. Our coyote's eyeball. I love that story. I think it's great. Now, Arcturus is the brightest star in the constellation of Bootes. It looks like it should be pronounced booties, but it's Bootes. And it's this kind of kite shape right here. I also think it looks like an ice cream cone, right? You got the cone and then the scoop of ice cream right here. But this is actually supposed to be a man, a bear herder who's herding our two bears across the sky. And this is a really good example of how constellations don't necessarily look like we're told they're supposed to. A lot of people think that once they know where to look, the constellation's just going to make sense and it's going to be exactly what it says it is. And that's honestly most of the time not the case. And so this is a good example of that. All right, so we're going to do one more star hop. We have from the handle of the Big Dipper arced to Arcturus. And now from Arcturus, we're going to spike down to this bright star, Spica. And Spica is the brightest star in the constellation of Virgo the Maiden. And Virgo is a pretty big constellation. Spica is her hand. And so here is her body. You can kind of think of one arm with kind of her hand on her hip. Her other arm is up waving hello. Her head would be here. And then her legs come off down this way. So Virgo is actually named Persephone. And she is the daughter of the goddess Demeter. And Persephone was a very beautiful woman, and Hades, the god of the underworld, fell in love with her and decided instead of being, a normal guy and kind of wooing her and winning her affections, he was just going to kidnap her and force her into being into a relationship with him. And so poor Persephone is in the underworld as Hades' captive, and her mother is trying to find her because suddenly her daughter goes missing, and she ends up finding her in the underworld and gets into this big fight with Hades. And while they're fighting, Persephone gets hungry and decides to eat a couple of pomegranate seeds. And this may not seem that important to us, but to the Greeks, where you ate was your home. And so by eating those pomegranate seeds, the underworld had become Persephone's home. And so Hades used that as aha, she has to stay here now. But Demeter was not having it, and so they ended up reaching a compromise that Persephone would be with each of them for 6 months of the year. So for the 6 months that Persephone is with her mother, that's when we see her up at the sky. And her mother is the goddess of the harvest and controls like weather and stuff like that. And so when her daughter is with her, she's very happy, and so we have really good weather. And then for the other 6 months of the year, when Persephone is with Hades, that's when she is underneath the horizon, and so we don't see her in the sky. And her mother is, of course, very upset and sad that her daughter is down in the underworld, and that is when we have bad weather. And so this was how the Greeks explained the seasons with the story of Persephone, Demeter, and Hades. So moving back over to Bootes and Arcturus, right next to our big kite, we can see this kind of backward C in the sky. This is a crown known as Corona Borealis. And we're actually going to use that crown to help us find Hercules. And so what you want to do is we're going to turn this crown into a spoon. Maybe it's a spoon to eat our ice cream cone of Bootes. But to do that, we're going to need to add in a couple of stars. And so we now have a handle and then the kind of scoop or bowl of the spoon. Well, the reason we did this is because these stars that we added in to be the handle of our spoon are actually the belt stars of Hercules. And so here is his full body. His arms are kind of going up this way, legs coming out this way. He's kind of flailing across the sky. Although I did have a group of students last year who decided, because here's the head of Draco the Dragon, who's breathing fire all over Hercules. We've decided that Hercules is actually doing an awesome ninja roll to escape the fire breath of Draco the Dragon. But Hercules has his own fantastic story that involves Leo and Cancer the Crab that we saw in the southwest sky. And I'm going to once again turn it over to Lindsay to tell us that story.
All right, so Hercules' story is actually a pretty long story, lots of different stuff in it. So I'm going to try to make a very, very, very long story short. So Hercules was half human and half god, and because of that, he was really, really strong. And unfortunately, he didn't really know how to control his own strength sometimes. And so he accidentally killed a lot of people. And this made people not like him very much. And he wanted people to like him. And so he went to this one king, and the king told him that there were 12 things that he could do to get people to like him again. And so one of the things was to defeat the Hydra. And the Hydra is a monster, looks kind of like a dragon, but without wings. And whenever you cut off one head, 3 more grow in its place. So pretty difficult to defeat. Now Hera, Zeus's wife, wanted Hercules to lose this particular battle, and so she sent little Cancer the Crab to go and nip at Hercules' heels to try to distract him so that he would hopefully get eaten by Hydra. Well, unfortunately for Cancer the crab, he got stepped on. And Hercules defeated the Hydra, and Hera felt kind of bad for Cancer the crab, so she put him up in the sky. And another thing, or one of the 12 things that Hercules could do, is to defeat the Nemean lion. So Leo the lion, when he was living, he was known as the Nemean lion, and he was kind of a magical lion. He had magical skin, and it could not be pierced with swords or arrows, so really difficult to kill. But Hercules, because he was so strong, he didn't really need arrows or swords. He could just strangle it to death. Then afterward, he wore the Nemean lion's fur as kind of like a cape. And since people thought of the Nemean lion as being kind of this immortal thing, the fact that Hercules was able to defeat this immortal monster actually made people more afraid of Hercules than they were to begin with. So it didn't really work out for him very well, unfortunately.
Yeah. Hercules' story is a little sad, as are a lot of the Greek stories. And so to finish up a little bit, we're going to go a little bit later into the night. Because later on in the night, we're starting to see the kind of highlight of the summer sky, which is known as the summer triangle. So up kind of later at night, so we're looking a little bit after midnight right now towards the east, you will see 3 bright stars, which are the 3 corners of our summer triangle. And so we have Vega, Altair, and Deneb. And the Milky Way, our galaxy, runs right through the middle of our summer triangle. So Vega is in the constellation of Lyra the Harp. And so we have kind of the harp, I'm forgetting the word, body, not body, frame. And then the strings kind of go along this way. But you can see some other things in this as well. Lindsay, you see a butterfly, right?
Yes, I see a butterfly.
And so this would be kind of the body of the butterfly and then the wings. But one of our favorites for what to see here actually came from a guest to the planetarium. I guess it's been a couple years now. And he said that he sees a man doing squats. And so here's the head and kind of like the barbell, and then the body and the squatting legs. And that is all I see now. I think it's fantastic. Now the other corner of Altair is in the constellation of Aquila the Eagle. And so we have kind of the teardrop shape of the body of the eagle, the wings, and then the claws. He's a bit of a chubby eagle, and that's because he is eating dolphins as his main course. And so down here is actually Delphinus the dolphin. And then our last corner of the triangle is Deneb. This is in Cygnus the swan, and so we have the swan tail feathers, the wings of the swan, and then the long swan neck. And so the story we're going to end on is a story using the stars that the Greeks call Cygnus the Swan, that we just showed you, but is a different constellation to another group of people. And I will let Lindsay finish us off with that story.
All right, so this is from the Shoshone Native American tribe. Instead of a swan, they saw a bear. So I kind of imagine that the swan's nose is now a bear's nose. And one of the wings is a leg, and the tail of the swan is another leg, and then the other wing is like the behind of the bear. So we have this bear in the sky now, and this bear, he climbed to the top of a very snowy mountain, and when he got to the top of the mountain, he slipped and he fell, and he started rolling down the mountain, and snow started sticking to his fur and sticking and sticking and sticking, and eventually he became this giant snowball rolling down the mountain, and he started rolling faster and faster and faster. And by the time he got to the bottom of the mountain, he was rolling so fast, he rolled right up another mountain, got launched into the night sky, and left a trail of snow behind him. And those are all of the stars in the Milky Way. And then he landed splat right there in the middle of the Milky Way.
I love it. And then one last thing, if you are wanting to stay up super late, you can also see a few more planets up in the very early mornings towards the southeast. You can see the planets of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. And this is, we're looking at about 4 a.m. So if you're a very early riser or a night owl like myself and you just go to bed really late, then you could also stay up to see a few more planets up in the very early morning sky. All right. So let's switch back over to our cameras. And so that is our constellation story time for the month of May. Hopefully you've enjoyed stories and learned some tips on how to find some of these constellations yourself. Again, the program that we use to do this is called Stellarium, which is free to download, so you can play around with that yourself and use that to help you learn the night sky. In the description for this video, I've also posted a link to a star map for the month of May that can help you find things in the nighttime sky. And I've also added links to one of our favorite phone apps that uses your GPS location so that all you have to do is hold up your phone to point to somewhere in the sky, and then on your phone it'll show you the map of the stars that you're pointing your phone towards and tell you what constellations, planets, anything like that are up. So all of those links are in the video description. Eli, did we get any questions or anything in?
We actually just got from Jenny Conrad that Zach, a third grader, has a question. But
All right.
We are ready for questions, so you can send that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Send those in. If you have any questions, write them in now. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about our schedule for the next week. So on Saturday, we're doing a show all about telescopes. So it's a beginner's guide to telescopes, where we're going to tell you a little bit about some of the basics of what a telescope is, give you our recommendations for good beginner's telescopes if you're interested in getting one for yourself, and then at the end also give you a few good kind of objects to look at. Kind of good beginner targets to look at through a telescope. And then next week, on Wednesday, we are doing a tour of the solar system. And so we'll go take an up-close look at planets and moons in our solar system. And then on Saturday, I'm really excited for this. Lindsay is going to be doing a show that we are calling Furry Physics, which is all about, Lindsay, you want to give a quick description?
Yeah, so all the cool ways animals use physics, like how spiders are able to walk on water. Some animals are able to sense Earth's magnetic field. Yeah, it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one. And so, yeah, Eli.
We got never mind. It was a statement. We saw the Big Dipper on fishing opener.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, the Big Dipper is a good one. It's a really good kind of starting constellation to find. And as you saw today, it's also a good way to kind of hop around the sky and find a bunch of other constellations as well. So that's always a good starting. If you can find the Big Dipper, that's a great launching off point to navigate the rest of the sky. All right. Well, Thank you everyone for joining us. As usual, these live stream videos are posted on our YouTube channel. If you want to go and watch one that you may have missed or rewatch one that you really enjoyed. As always, as well, if you have any future questions, you can leave them in the comments and we will be checking those and can come back and answer any questions. And if you have any suggestions or topics that you'd like to see in the future, let us know, because we'd like to cover things that you want to see. And yeah, we will be doing these for the foreseeable future until it is safe for us to open the planetarium back up, and we will let you know when that is. So yeah, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time. So bye.